Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. 2018 AP number 5. It was a non-calculator question. It's going to be a calculator question for you, so there's probably going to be some different things in there. I've got the work I'm going to work on over here in the original question, which you can have in front of you. I may move it on or off. I'll always keep it on for the graph. So the first part says we give a function, f of x equals e to the x times cosine of x. And part 1 says find the average rate of change between the intervals 0 and pi. When you hear average rate of change, you know it's fib faba. Always fib faba. So fib minus fa over ba. And let's see if we can find those particular values. I'm going to move this off the screen for a moment here. Okay, so we have between pi and 0 is what we're looking to do. You have 0 and pi, so I'm going to fill this in. Pi on the bottom minus 0. And now I need to find f of pi and f of 0. So really quick, the cosine graph looks like that at 0, 90, 180, 270, and 360. Okay, so that would mean that the cosine, okay, so that would mean that e of pi times the cosine of pi. Cosine of pi is negative 1. Negative 1 times e to the pi is negative e to the pi. And now I have to find f of x at 0 is e to the 0 times the cosine of 0. The cosine of 0 is 1. And e to the 0 is 1. So this becomes that right there. We can leave our answer exactly like that. If it's calculator 1, they ask us in thousandths. We can always just put it in the calculator and come up with our answer. If we see average rate of change, we're just finding the slope at between 2 points. Okay, the next question says, what is the slope of the tangent line? Now I'll underline this right here, the tangent line. As soon as I hear tangent line, I'm thinking, do I need to make a whole tangent line? No, they just want the slope of the tangent line at x equals 3 pi over 2. Well, the slope of the tangent line is the slope of the curve. So all we need to do is find the derivative of that function up top. And the derivative of that function up top is going to be f prime of x. And this part's worth 1 point, so we'll just find it first. U prime v plus uv prime. U prime v plus u v prime. Oh, sorry. I'll sneeze these. I was doing it right there. That was my u, and that was my v. And that gives me one of the 2 points for this problem right there. And then I just need to fill in the actual 3 pi over 2. If this was non-calculator, f pi of 3 pi over 2, I could just fill it on in, which would be e to the 3 pi over 2 cosine 3 pi over 2 minus e to the 3 pi over 2 times negative sine 3 pi over 2. Non-calculator, leave it, shift my page, sorry. You leave it exactly like that. We don't have to fill things in, but I can probably figure some things out right here. So 3 pi over 2, the cosine of 3 pi over 2, which is right there, is 0. So this whole first piece is just gone. And the sine of pi over 2, the sine of 270, is negative 1. So this part's gone. Okay, so sine of 3 pi over 2, like I said, is negative 1 times a negative is a positive 1, plus e to the 3 pi over 2 equals e to the 3 pi over 2. Once again, on a non-calculator, you could have stopped right here. If it's a calculator, we'll just actually put the values on in and go from there. Okay, the next part of the problem says find the absolute minimum of the graph and justify your answers. Okay, if they ask us about mins and maxes, we're always going to look at the first derivative because that tells us direction. If they ask us about POIs, or changing concavity, we're going to look at the second derivative. Because this is asking about the absolute value of, absolute minimum of f, I'm going to look at just f prime. Okay, so I'm going to write this down. I need to find out where in between 0 and x, 2 pi, f prime is equal to 0. So let's do it the way that you would have to do it right now, which would be literally, I'm going to do it anyway. I don't think they could really ask this question. I'll show you why they can't ask this question to you. Well, let's just do it the way let's do both. I can do that. Okay, so I'm going to go to a new document. I'm going to turn the brightness off for a second. Okay, a new document. Graph, I make sure I'm in radian mode. I put the original function in, which is e to the x. Let me clear it for a second. E to the x times cosine x. Now I change my window. That'd be menu window settings. Because I'm in radian mode, I look at my x's between 0. And they ask me to look between 0 and 2 pi, so I can fill 2 pi in here. I think I can put it in right as 2 pi. Let's see. Hit enter. There's the graph. I need to find the absolute minimum of the graph. I can see it's down there. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. A little more. Okay, I'll go menu, analyze graph, minimum, somewhere between here and there. And there's the minimum at 3.9. The minimum is negative 35.888. So the minimum is negative 35.889. Justify. I graphed f of x. Now, in actuality, you couldn't really do this on the test originally because you didn't have the calculator with which to work with. So what you had to do was really look at the problem and figure out when f prime of x could be equal to 0. Well, where could that be equal to 0? It could be equal to 0 at, I'm going to write down the function, which is ex to the cosine x minus, I'll put the minus sign there, ex to the sine x. When could that be equal to 0? If I factor out e to the x, I'm left with cosine x minus sine x equals 0. Set both things equal to 0. When is e to the x equal to 0? Never. And this is going to be 0 when cosine x equals sine of x, because I just shifted the cosine to the other side. Well, there's only 3 possible values where that could be, and those are at, 2 possible values where those could be, between 0 and 2 pi, and if I were to graph, remember this is sine, cosine looks like this. It's here and here, which are at 45 degrees, and 225 degrees. And you'd have to test those numbers out. We're not going to worry about that because if they ask us this problem, we're just going to graph it and find where the maximum is. So this is kind of how they'd have us go if it was a non-calculator, but it can't be. The last part's one I kind of think is going to be there. And I'm going to show you this time they give us a graph. And as always, they're not going to give us the graph we really want. Let me focus this. That graph is G prime. So if this graph is G prime, if G prime is the values, that means G double prime is the slopes. And the integral of G, the integral of G prime equals G, which is the area. This I'm going up. I'm not sure which I'm going to use, but it's telling me it's a differential function such that G of pi over 2 is 0. There's the graph of G prime. It says find the value of the limit of f of x over g of x, or state that it does not exist. Justify your answer. If they're giving me a limit problem, it's going to happen every time if it's here, folks. You're going to put in a number. You're going to get 0 over 0. You're going to have to use L'Hopital and take the derivative of the top and of the bottom and see what you get. So let's see. So let's fill this information on in. To find the limit of something, we just put in a number. So put pi over 2 into the bottom of the fraction. Oh, and we get 0 on the bottom. Okay, now we have to find out what f of x is equal to as x approaches pi over 2. I can do it right in the calculator. I graphed it. I can go to pi over 2, menu, 51, pi divided by 2. And I have the value of the graph is 0. So I get 0 over 0 for this function, which means in order to find the actual value, I have to L'Hopital it. So literally just write down L'Hopital. And I'm going to move it off to the side from, no, I'll leave it there for a bit. So that means we're going to find the limit as x approaches pi over 2 of the derivative of the top, which is f prime of x, over the derivative of the bottom, which is g prime of x. And we'll see what we get, and that answer will be what the correct answer is. So let's take a look at the graph first. So I want g prime of pi over 2. Well, there it is right there. That's equal to 2. Now I need x prime of pi over 2. No, not x prime, f prime of pi over 2. That means I need to put pi over 2 into the derivative function, which would be, I'm going to write out the long way first, which would be e to the pi over 2 times the cosine of pi over 2 plus e to the pi over 2 times negative sine pi over 2. I could leave that answer just like that on a non-calculator problem. You might have to put it in the calculator to get an answer. If you want to see what's going to happen, we're finding values at 90 degrees. The cosine of 90 is 0. And the sine of 90 equals 1. So when this simplifies down, the cosine of 90 is 0. This piece is gone right off the bat. So the next part becomes sine of pi over 2 is 1. We've got a negative. So it's negative e to the pi over 2 over 2. And I could leave it like that. And that worked out because this was 0 and this was 1. Before the negative sign gets included in there. Let's circle that piece. Okay, so the only part we're really not going to worry about was part C here. If we ever had to do this, we're just going to graph it in the calculator because we have our calculators to graph with. Okay, another video down. Next one coming. Talk to you in a little bit.